Chapter 1. The arrival. The train rattled through the misty valleys of Saxony, its wheels screeching against the tracks as it approached Wolfsbach. It was October 1973, and I, Heinrich Voss, had accepted a position as an archivist at the city's municipal library. At 32, I sought solitude after a failed marriage and a string of uninspiring jobs in Dresden. Wolfsbach, a small city nestled in the shadow of the Ruhr Mountains, promised quiet and a decent wage. The library, an imposing Gothic structure, housed records dating back centuries, and I was to catalog them. As the train slowed, I glimpsed the city through the fog, crooked rooftops, cobblestone streets, and the dark spire of the library piercing the sky. The air was damp when I stepped onto the platform, carrying only a suitcase and a leather-bound notebook. A clerk named Frau Heller greeted me, her face pale and stern. She said little, only that my lodging was above the library. The streets were nearly empty as we walked, the echo of our footsteps swallowed by the mist. The library loomed ahead, its stone facade weathered, windows like hollow eyes. I felt a strange weight settle in my chest, as if the city itself were watching me. Chapter 2. The routine. My days began at dawn. The library's attic apartment was small but functional, with a single window overlooking Wolfsbach's central square. My work involved sorting through dusty tomes, crumbling ledgers, and handwritten letters in the archive room, a cavernous space lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The records detailed the city's history, trade logs, family genealogies, and accounts of plagues and wars. The monotony was soothing. I spent hours deciphering faded ink, the scratch of my pen the only sound in the silence. At night, I wandered the square, where lamplights cast long shadows. The townsfolk were distant, their conversations hushed when I passed. Frau Heller visited weekly with supplies, her eyes avoiding mine. I didn't mind the isolation, it suited me. The library's silence was a comfort, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling or the wind rattling the windows. I began sketching the city in my notebook, its gabled houses, the river cutting through the valley, finding solace in its stark beauty. Yet, at times, I felt a faint unease, as if the archive's shadows held secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. Chapter 3. The first sign. 3 weeks into my stay, I found a peculiar document. Buried in a crate of 18th-century records was a journal, its leather cover cracked, pages yellowed. The handwriting was frantic, detailing a curse that plagued Wolfsbach in 1762. The author, a priest named Johann Kruger, described strange occurrences, whispers in the streets, figures seen at dusk, and livestock found drained of blood. He wrote of a presence in the forest beyond the city, something that watched but could not be seen. I dismissed it as superstition, but the words lingered. That night, as I walked the square, I noticed something odd, a set of footprints in the mud near the riverbank. They were human, barefoot, and unnaturally large, leading toward the forest. I followed them until they vanished at the tree line. A chill ran through me, not from the cold, but from a sudden sense of being observed. I returned to the library, locking the door behind me, my heart pounding as the wind howled outside. Chapter 4. The growing unease. The footprints haunted me. Each evening, I checked the riverbank, but they never reappeared. I buried myself in work, cataloging records with renewed focus, yet Kruger's journal gnawed at my thoughts. I began cross-referencing it with other documents, finding mentions of similar events. Unexplained disappearances in 1820, a fire in 1895 blamed on ghostly lights in the forest. The library felt different now, its silence oppressive. At night, I heard faint sounds, scratches from the walls, a low hum like distant voices. I checked the radio, an old device left in the apartment, but it picked up only static. My sketches grew darker, filled with jagged trees and faceless figures. Frau Heller noticed my unease during her next visit. "You look tired, Herr Voss," she said, her voice flat. I mentioned the journal, but she waved it off, saying old stories were best left alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum grew louder, vibrating in my chest, and I swore I saw a shadow move across the window, though no one was in the square below. Chapter 5. The Discovery. Desperate for answers, I dug deeper into the archive. In a locked cabinet, I found a sealed box labeled "Verboten." Inside were letters, maps, and a crude sketch of a creature, human-like but twisted, with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. The letters, written by a 19th-century mayor, warned of a Wolfsgeist, a spirit tied to the forest, blamed for centuries of misfortune. One letter mentioned a ritual to appease it, performed every 50 years, last conducted in 1923. The date chilled me. 1973 was exactly 50 years later. I began to notice patterns in the city: clocks running slow, birds avoiding the forest's edge, and a faint smell of decay in the air. That evening, as I walked the square, I heard a sound, a low, guttural moan from the river. I froze, gripping my notebook. The moan came again, closer, and I ran back to the library, my breath ragged. The archive room felt colder now, the shadows deeper, as if something were waiting. Chapter 6. The encounter. The next morning, I ventured into the forest, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. The trees were dense, their branches clawing at the sky. The air was heavy, the smell of decay stronger. I followed a narrow path, clutching a flashlight and a pocket knife. Deep in the forest, I found a clearing with a stone altar, weathered and covered in moss. Strange symbols were carved into it, matching those in Kruger's journal. As I sketched the altar, a twig snapped behind me. I turned, but no one was there. My pulse raced as the air grew colder, the forest unnaturally silent. Then I saw it, a figure at the clearing's edge, tall and thin, its face obscured by shadow. It didn't move, but I felt its gaze, heavy and unyielding. I stumbled back, dropping my notebook, and ran toward the city. The figure didn't follow, but its presence lingered, a weight on my shoulders as I locked myself in the library. Chapter 7. The escalation. Sleep became impossible. The hum was constant now, seeping into my dreams, where I saw the creature from the sketch, its hollow eyes staring through me. I radioed the Dresden archive office, reporting the journal and the figure. The operator, a gruff man named Klaus, sounded skeptical but promised to send someone in a week. "Stay calm, Herr Voss," he said. I wasn't calm. The footprints returned, circling the library at night, fresh each morning. I stopped walking the square, staying inside, my knife always close. One night, the library's lights flickered, and a book fell from a shelf, a record of Wolfsbach's founding, open to a page about a blood debt, ode to the forest. I read until dawn, my hands trembling. The creature wasn't a spirit but something older, tied to the land, awakened by neglect. I felt trapped, the library no longer a sanctuary but a cage. Chapter 8. The climax. On the seventh night, the storm came. Rain battered the library, and thunder shook the walls. I sat in the archive room, surrounded by records, when the hum became a scream, sharp, inhuman, echoing from the square. I grabbed my knife and ran to the window. The creature stood in the rain, its form clearer now, skeletal, with skin like wet parchment, its eyes glowing faintly. It moved toward the library, its steps deliberate. I barricaded the door with a desk, my heart pounding. The scream came again, closer, and the door rattled violently. I clutched the knife, my breath shallow, as the windows shook. Then, silence. I peered through a crack in the barricade and saw nothing but rain. Thinking it gone, I stepped back, only to hear a crash from the archive room. The creature was inside, its shadow stretching across the walls, its stench filling the air. Chapter 9. The escape. Panic seized me. I ran to the attic, locking the trapdoor behind me. The creature's footsteps echoed below, slow and heavy. I grabbed the radio, shouting for help, but static drowned my words. The trapdoor shook, splintering under the creature's weight. I climbed onto the roof through a skylight, the storm soaking me as I clung to the tiles. The creature followed, its claws scraping the stone. In desperation, I remembered the altar's symbols, a ritual to banish the Wolfsgeist. I scrambled down the fire escape, running through the storm toward the forest. The creature pursued, its screams cutting through the thunder. In the clearing, I carved the symbols into the mud with my knife, reciting words from the journal. The creature lunged, but the ground shook, and a blinding light erupted from the altar, forcing it back. I collapsed, exhausted, as the screams faded. Chapter 10. The resolution. The rescue team from Dresden arrived at dawn, finding me in the clearing, soaked and delirious. They searched the forest, but found no trace of the creature. The library was untouched, the footprints gone, the altar silent. I told my story, but they dismissed it as a breakdown, blaming isolation and stress. I left Wolfsbach that day, returning to Dresden, where I took a desk job far from archives. The library was closed, its records sealed, but I heard whispers that the lights still flicker at night. I keep Kruger's journal, its pages a reminder of what I saw. The men who rescued me saw nothing, but their uneasy glances told me they felt it. The presence that lingers in Wolfsbach, waiting for the next debt to be paid. I never returned, but sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, I hear a faint hum, and I wonder if it followed me. Conclusion. The echoes of Wolfsbach. The train ride back to Dresden was a blur, the rhythmic clatter of wheels against tracks a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of Wolfsbach. I sat alone in the compartment, my suitcase at my feet, Kruger's journal tucked inside my coat like a guilty secret. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy, as if the storm had followed me from the island. My hands still trembled, and my reflection in the window looked gaunt, my eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. The events in Wolfsbach felt like a dream, yet the weight in my chest, the unshakable sense of being watched, told me they were real. I had escaped, but I wasn't free. Not yet. Dresden welcomed me with its familiar bustle, trams rattling through the streets, vendors calling out in the market, the Elbe River glinting under the autumn sun. I rented a small apartment in the Altstadt, a cramped space above a bakery, where the smell of fresh bread mingled with the city's coal dust air. I took a clerical job at the State Archive, a mundane role sorting government records. It was safe, predictable, far removed from the shadowed stacks of Wolfsbach's library. I avoided old books, especially those with leather covers or faded ink. I told myself I could rebuild, that the routine would anchor me, that the hum I sometimes heard at night was just the city's pulse, not the Wolfsgeist's echo, but the past clung to me like damp rot. At night, I lay awake, listening to the creak of the apartment's floorboards, half expecting to hear the creature's guttural scream. Kruger's journal became an obsession. I hid it in a locked drawer, but found myself opening it in the small hours, tracing the priest's frantic scrawl. His words about the Wolfsgeist, its hunger, its tie to the land, looped in my mind. The ritual I'd performed in the clearing had driven it back, but for how long? The journal hinted at cycles, a blood debt, renewed every 50 years. I counted the years obsessively: 1762, 1820, 1895, 1923, 1973. The math was relentless. If the pattern held, the creature would stir again in 2023, long after I'd be gone. But that thought brought no comfort. What if it wasn't bound by time? What if it had followed me? My colleagues in Dresden noticed my unease. Herr Muller, a jovial man with a penchant for cheap cigars, asked why I flinched at sudden noises. I brushed him off, claiming fatigue, but his eyes lingered, curious and concerned. I avoided socializing, preferring the solitude of my apartment, where I could sketch in my notebook, though now my drawings were not of Wolfsbach's beauty, but of its horrors. The altar's jagged symbols, the creature's skeletal frame, its glowing eyes. Each sketch felt like a confession, a way to purge the fear that festered inside me. Yet it wasn't enough. The hum grew louder, a low vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I checked the radio, an ancient model left by the previous tenant, but it offered only static. Just like in Wolfsbach Point one evening, 6 months after my return, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was unmarked, the paper yellowed, smelling faintly of mildew. Inside was a single sentence in spidery script. The debt is not paid. My heart lurched. The handwriting wasn't mine, nor was it Frau Heller's or anyone I knew. I tore it up, scattering the pieces, but the words burned in my mind. That night, the hum was unbearable, a pulsing drone that shook my bones. I stood at the window, staring into the darkened street, and saw a shadow move. A tall, thin figure at the edge of the lamplight. It didn't approach, but its presence was unmistakable. I locked the door, checked the windows, and sat with my knife, the same one I'd carried in Wolfsbach, its blade glinting in the dim light. The next day, I visited the Dresden archive, searching for records on Wolfsbach. I found little, a few mentions of its founding in 1347, trade logs, a brief note about a fire in 1895. But one document caught my eye, a letter from 1923, written by a Wolfsbach librarian named Clara Braun. She described a disturbance in the forest, a ritual performed to quiet the unrest. Her words mirrored Kruger's, warning that the Wolfsgeist could not be destroyed, only delayed. She mentioned a relic, a stone carved with the same symbols as the altar, hidden in Dresden's cathedral to keep it safe. I felt a chill. The cathedral was a 10-minute walk from my apartment. Was the creature drawn to it? To me, I began visiting the cathedral daily, a towering Gothic structure that dwarfed Wolfsbach's library. Its stained glass windows cast eerie patterns, and the air inside was cool, heavy with incense. I searched for the relic, running my hands along the stone walls, peering into alcoves. The priests watched me warily, but I didn't care. I needed answers. One evening, in a forgotten crypt beneath the altar, I found it. A smooth, black stone, no larger than my fist, etched with symbols that burned under my touch. I wrapped it in cloth and took it home, locking it in the drawer with Kruger's journal. That night, the hum stopped. For the first time in months, I slept without dreams, but peace was fleeting. The next morning, I found footprints outside my door, barefoot, unnaturally large, etched in ash. They led down the stairs and vanished at the street. My breath caught, my hands shaking as I clutched the knife. The Wolfsgeist wasn't gone. It had followed me, or perhaps I had carried it, tethered by the journal, the relic, or my own fear. I considered destroying them both, burning the journal, smashing the stone, but Kruger's warnings held me back. The ritual had worked once, perhaps it could again. I began researching, poring over folklore texts in the Dresden archive, seeking clues to banish the creature permanently. Months passed, my life a cycle of work, research, and sleepless nights. The footprints appeared sporadically, always in ash, always vanishing at the street. The city felt different now, its vibrancy muted, as if Wolfsbach's shadow had spread. I saw the creature twice more, once in an alley, its silhouette flickering under a street lamp, and once reflected in the Elbe, its eyes glowing beneath the water. Each sighting left me trembling, my sketches growing frantic, filling page after page with its form. I wrote letters to the Wolfsbach library, hoping Frau Heller might know more, but they went unanswered. The Dresden archive offered no further clues, and the cathedral's priests dismissed my questions, their eyes pitying. By autumn 1974, I was a shell of myself. My colleagues whispered about my pallor, my erratic behavior. Herr Muller suggested a doctor, but I refused. How could I explain the hum, the footprints, the creature? I began carrying the relic with me, its weight a strange comfort. I studied Kruger's journal until the pages frayed, memorizing the ritual's symbols, its incantations. I knew I couldn't run forever. The Wolfsgeist was patient, its hunger endless. I had to face it, not in Wolfsbach's forest, but here, in Dresden, where the relic might hold the key. I chose a night in October, exactly 1 year after my arrival in Wolfsbach. The air was crisp, the city quiet under a full moon. I took the relic and journal to the cathedral, slipping into the crypt after hours. The stone walls seemed to pulse, the air thick with the smell of decay. I carved the ritual symbols into the floor, using a knife dipped in salt, as Kruger had described. I placed the relic at the center, reciting the incantations, my voice trembling but steady. The hum returned, louder than ever, shaking the crypt's walls. Shadows danced, growing longer, denser, until the creature emerged from the darkness. It was as I remembered, skeletal, its skin peeling, eyes glowing with a hunger older than time. It didn't scream this time, but spoke, its voice a rasp that clawed at my mind. "The debt," it said, "is yours." I held my ground, clutching the knife, continuing the incantations. The relic glowed, its symbols burning white-hot. The creature lunged, its claws grazing my arm, but I drove the knife into the floor, completing the ritual's final symbol. A deafening wail filled the crypt, the air splitting as the creature dissolved into ash, the relic crumbling with it. The hum stopped, replaced by silence so profound it felt like a void that I staggered from the crypt, blood dripping from my arm. The journal clutched to my chest. The cathedral was empty, the city asleep. I returned to my apartment, burned the journal's pages one by one, watching the flames consume Kruger's words. The ash footprints never returned, nor did the creature. I told myself it was over, that the ritual had worked, that the Wolfsgeist was gone. I resumed my work, my sketches turning to cityscapes, the Elba's gentle flow. But doubt lingered. The cathedral's crypt felt different now, its silence too heavy, as if something still watched from the shadows. Years later, I left Dresden, moving to Berlin, then Munich, chasing distance from Wolfsbach's memory. I married again, a kind woman named Anna, who never asked about my scars or my reluctance to visit old churches. I stopped sketching, stopped reading old books. But at night, in the quiet, I sometimes hear a faint hum, barely audible, like a whisper from the earth. I tell myself it's the city, the hum of life, but I keep a knife by my bed, its blade sharp, just in case. Wolfsbach taught me that some debts are never fully paid, and some shadows never fade.